The church felt colder than winter, a chill that rose from the marble and climbed into my jaw until I had to bite down to keep it from trembling. A handful of relatives hovered around the casket as if proximity could count as love. Their whispers, a low, poisonous drone that kept repeating the same verdict: cruel old miser died as he lived alone. When the minister asked if anyone wished to speak, the silence was so complete it sounded like a slammed door. I stood because I could not bear to let the door close on a single story told only in venom. I was going to tell them about Richard Sterling, the grandfather who forged me on an anvil I didn't choose, and who, it turned out, had been hiding more than his feelings. Before that icy morning, there was a girl with paint under her fingernails and a dog named Buster, who slept across her feet. My parents, David and Sarah Bennett, filled our small house with color and laughter. My father taught me to balance on his shoulders so I could pretend I was flying, and my mother's voice made the kitchen hum like a people-sized lullaby. One phone call untied the knot that held our family together. 2 officers at the door, faces carved with pity, spoke careful words about a crash in the mountains and no survivors. I didn't scream. Instead, something inside me froze so hard it made a sound I could hear only in dreams. The social worker's sensible voice mixed with the rustle of a stranger's purse and my Aunt Clara pursed mouth. Calculating gaze said she would take me. She didn't ask me where I wanted to go. She didn't ask me anything at all. The road unraveled into a lonelier world until even the wind sounded tired. We stopped at a farmhouse that looked held together by memory and rust, a tin roof like a dull blade, and paint curling from the boards. On the porch stood a man, both wiry and tall, with eyes the color of winter sky and the focus of someone who measured days in labor. He looked through me, as if weighing the cost of mistakes I hadn't made yet. I waited for arms that never opened. "You're late, Elizabeth." "Don't waste my time," he said, and the words clipped off any hope of softness. That was my welcome to the school I didn't know I'd been enrolled in. At 5 a.m. every morning, his alarm cleaved the dark. He believed in work the way other people believed in prayer. His faith had a schedule, and his devotion did not waver. My room held a bed, a desk, and a window that framed the barn. On the wall, a chalkboard delivered the only encouragement I would get: work hard. Breakfast at 6 a.m. was taken at opposite ends of a table so long it felt like a sentence. He corrected everything: muddy boots, slow chewing, a spoon left crooked in the sink, as if carelessness were a moral failure. Once, when my blistered hands shook from shoveling manure, and I dared to whisper that they hurt, his stare cut the air. Pain, he said, wasn't a reason to stop. It was proof you were moving. Grief and labor braided themselves into a rope I climbed because there was nowhere else to go. I fed pigs, scrubbed floors, and learned the patient arithmetic of chores. Every small task added up to a day that ended with a kind of exhausted sleep, where crying felt like a debt I couldn't afford. When I forgot the dishes, once he stood in my doorway with an old leather strap, not striking but slicing the air with its whistle, a sound that said failure would not be tolerated. I washed plates in water so cold it bit, and if tears fell, they were just another spill to clean. Time, though, has a way of turning even a prison into a classroom when your heart is stubborn enough. I began to recognize his lessons, the strict clock that taught me to meet moments instead of chasing them. The roof he repaired in a snowstorm while I begged to wait until morning, his hammer steady as breath. The frugality that made him wrap bread ends and pocket-bent nails as if waste were a theft committed against your own future. He kept a tiny ledger where every expense, no matter how mean, earned a line. When I spilled fresh milk, he didn't shout. He looked at the white pool and said it was sweat turned to loss. I hated that he was right and loved that the truth felt solid under my feet. He told the truth even when it landed like a stone. Lying, he said, was a mirror you cracked first in your mind. Responsibility, he claimed, was not a feeling, but a place you stood every day, rain or shine. When I asked why he didn't sell the farm and move to town, he said a person didn't escape the work that made them. He carried that belief the way he carried a hay bale close to the chest and without complaint. By the time I was old enough to understand what his routines were building in me, I wanted something he couldn't recognize: the permission to be my mother's daughter and paint the world that had taken her from me. I kept a portfolio under the bed, like a smuggled secret, and woke before the alarm to sketch the frost lifting off the fields. At night, I finished my homework and patched jeans and counted change in a jar until responsibility and dreams sat across from each other like wary guests at the same table. On the day I turned 18, the ledger of my childhood felt balanced enough to demand a future of my own, though I knew he kept a different accounting of what life owed and what life repaid. I didn't plan a battle that evening, only a conversation. I wanted to be seen not as a problem to solve, but as a person asking for a path. But want is not a shield, it is a door. And when I walked through it with my acceptance letter in my pocket and my heart beating like a second clock, I found the storm I had been postponing had already gathered in the kitchen. He was sitting at the kitchen table, back straight, the same cup of coffee steaming beside a pile of unopened envelopes. I placed my report card and the art school acceptance letter in front of him like offerings. I got in, Grandpa. I said, my voice steady, but small. It's the best one in the state. I want to be a painter like Mom. His eyes flicked to the papers, then to me without curiosity. You'll go to business school, he said, as if reciting weather. You'll study finance. Painting won't feed you. His words were stone. My heart cracked against them. No, Grandpa. I don't want that. I want to create. He looked up, his jaw tightening. Create, his tone curled the word into mockery. You think colors and dreams will build a roof or buy your bread. Foolish. You're still a child. Something inside me, years of silence, fear, and swallowed grief, ignited. You never understand me. I shouted, my voice shaking the air that had always been too still in this house. You think yelling and chores make me strong. You think I wanted to lose my parents and live like a ghost. You never even asked if I was okay. He rose, towering, his hands trembling not with fear but fury. Ungrateful girl, he thundered. Everything I've done was to save you from weakness. I gave you food, a home, a future. You took my future. I cried back tears, finally spilling, hot and wild. You never saved me. You caged me. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Then he pointed toward the door. You want freedom? Go. But don't come crawling back when the world eats you alive. The words hit like a verdict. I stared at him, saw the same unyielding gray in his eyes that had watched me scrub floors, and for the first time I hated it. I packed that night just a few clothes, my mother's photo, and my sketchbook, and walked into the cold. The gravel road stretched endlessly under a bruised sky. Wind cut through my jacket. Anger burned hot enough to keep me moving until exhaustion smothered it. By dawn, I sat under a lonely oak tree, shivering. The quiet pressed on me until his voice echoed in my head again. If you start something, finish it. Work doesn't wait for weather. I hated that even now his words guided me. Slowly, I stood. The shame of what I'd said, of what I'd done, crawled up my throat. I was still his student, even in rebellion. When I returned, light was leaking over the fields. I rehearsed the apology I'd give, the humility I'd force into every word. I'd tell him I'd go to business school, that I was sorry for everything. But the farmhouse was silent. Too silent. The clock that marked every second of our lives had stopped. I found him on the kitchen floor, his ledger fallen open beside him. His eyes, those relentless eyes, were closed. I dropped to my knees, calling his name until my voice broke. The doctor said it was a stroke. Quick, quiet. I refused to believe a man so unyielding could just stop. 3 days later, the church filled with family I barely recognized. Aunt Clara wore black silk and false grief. My cousins whispered about inheritance, about the old miser who had left nothing but dust and debts. I wanted to scream to make them understand he was not simple cruelty wrapped in skin, but I didn't yet know how to explain the kind of love that hides behind iron. When the minister asked if anyone wished to speak, heads lowered. No one moved. The silence was unbearable. My legs carried me forward before my mind caught up. "I'm Elizabeth," I said, voice trembling his granddaughter. I looked at the coffin, the polished wood that now held the man who had never given a hug, but had given me something harder and truer. He was strict. I began hearing soft snickers ripple through the pews. He scolded me for every mistake, made me wake before dawn, never said a kind word. Aunt Clara smirked satisfied, but I wasn't finished, and yet I said louder now he taught me to wake up when life wanted me asleep. He taught me that discipline is freedom, that perseverance builds walls stronger than comfort. He taught me not to waste anything, not time, not effort, not truth. He wasn't gentle, but he was steadfast. And that kind of love isn't warm, but it lasts. The church was silent again, but this time it wasn't mockery, just quiet. When I returned to my seat, a man in a gray suit approached me. "Elizabeth Sterling?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Robert Thompson, your grandfather's lawyer." Every eye in the room turned. According to Mr. Sterling's will, he said, pulling a thick folder from his briefcase, "You are his sole heir." The air vanished from my lungs. Murmurs swelled. Clara stood face red, shrieking, "That can't be true. He had nothing." But the lawyer only shook his head. "Your grandfather was a private man, Miss Sterling. He owned extensive investments, land stock holdings worth several $billion." The room exploded. My world tilted. I could only stare at the casket, stunned. The man who counted every penny had been richer than all of them combined. Then the lawyer handed me a small leather journal. "He asked me to give you this personally. He said it mattered more than anything else." My fingers shook as I opened it. The first line, written the day after my parents' death, read, "I don't know how to raise her. I only know how to build things, not people." My breath caught. Each page was filled with short notes, fragments of a man learning too late how to love. "I fear she'll hate me. I hope she'll survive." The final entry. "She wants freedom. I understand. I love her, but don't know how to say it. I only want her strong, so no one can hurt her." Tears blurred the ink. In that moment, everything he'd done, every order, every lesson, every cold silence cracked open to reveal the truth. His love had never been absent, only buried under duty. I sat there clutching the journal as if it were a lifeline, my tears dripping onto the worn leather. For the first time, I understood him not as the tyrant I'd believed he was, but as a man who'd been taught that tenderness was weakness. His love had been forged in hardship, hammered into discipline and silence, because that was the only language he knew. Every early morning, every harsh word, every withheld embrace had been his way of preparing me to face a world that would not care about my grief. I had hated him for building walls around me, never realizing he was teaching me how to stand when everything else fell apart. After the funeral, I returned to the farmhouse alone. The house felt both emptier and heavier, filled with echoes of his footsteps and the soft ticking of a clock that had started again, as if time itself refused to stop for sorrow. I opened the ledger, still lying on the table, the pages neat and unwavering. He had recorded everything, every penny spent, every crop harvested, every day worked. At the very bottom of the last page, written in his tight handwriting, were 4 words: "Take care. Be strong." I ran my fingers over them, feeling their quiet power settle into me. Days passed, and the vultures of family descended. Clara called, pretending concern, fishing for details about the inheritance. I said nothing. They didn't deserve to know that the man they mocked had lived as simply as he did not, out of greed but principle. The money meant little compared to what I'd found in his journal. That book had become my compass. I began to see that he'd left me not wealth to spend, but wisdom to live by. Still, I couldn't stay there forever. The farm, though sacred, was a museum of ghosts. I took only what mattered: the journal, the ledger, and the memory of his voice saying, "You start something, you finish it." The rest, the acres, the equipment, the accounts, I left in the lawyer's care while I decided what to do next. I applied to a business school in a neighboring state. It was what he'd wanted, and for the first time, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like respect. I wanted to understand his world, the one built on logic, numbers, and endurance. The acceptance letter arrived on a gray morning, and as I packed, I placed his journal at the top of my suitcase. It felt like taking him with me. College was another battlefield. While others partied, I worked shifts at a coffee shop, saved every dollar, and studied late into the night. There were times I failed, times I wanted to cry or quit. But each time I opened his journal, I found a fragment of strength waiting for me. Work doesn't wait for weather. Lying is lying to yourself. Finish what you start. Those words became my armor. By 22, I graduated with honors, not because I was gifted, but because I had learned the one truth he'd spent his life drilling into me. Persistence outlasts everything. With a portion of the inheritance, I started a small logistics company, helping local farms transport their goods to markets. It was an idea born from the land he loved, from the same barns and fields where he'd taught me to work. The beginning was brutal. Broken trucks, delayed payments, sleepless nights, but each setback felt familiar, like an echo of those farm mornings at 5 a.m. when quitting was never an option. Slowly the business grew, and as it grew, so did I. Years later, I stood on the hill where he was buried, the wind soft and steady against my face. The grave was simple, just like him, no grand monument, no marble angels. I brought a bouquet of daisies, my mother's favorite, and laid them gently at the base of the headstone. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered, "about the world, about strength, about me." I told him about the company, about how it was thriving, about how I'd finally bought a small house of my own. I told him I had begun painting again only on Sundays when the world was quiet, and that some of my art now hung in local cafes. "I didn't give up on that part of me," I said softly. "You taught me not to give up on anything." The wind rustled through the grass, and for a heartbeat it felt like he was there, standing tall and proud as ever, arms crossed, that faint glimmer in his gray eyes. I realized then that he hadn't died with his silence. He had passed it to me as a challenge to speak, to live, to understand. His wealth wasn't in the billions written in bank statements, but in the lessons etched into my bones: discipline, perseverance, thrift, responsibility, honesty. Those were his true inheritance, and they were worth more than all the money in the world. As I turned to leave, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the fields in gold, and for the first time in years, I felt peace instead of longing. I whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa. I understand now." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength love can take even when it doesn't look like love at all. Leave a comment below. Have you ever learned too late what someone's silence was really saying?